Gorgeous listener. Hey, it's Connie. Okay, just jumping in here really quickly to let you guys know that when I introduce today's guest, we talk about all the freaking awesome things we're going to discuss, and then we don't talk about any of them. It's all good though. Seriously. Okay, so we get into this really freaking amazing discussion about intuition, how we can get more of it, how we can get into a flow state, and how it can lead us to the life we should be leading. You're going to hear about the infamous Malick verdict. Don't know what that is? You will soon. So join us on the show. Well, you're already here on the show. Okay, let's do it. Lady Balls Radio, a celebration of women bold enough to live their truth and inspiration for others to do the same. Welcome, Lady Ballers. I'm way excited for today's show. Justine Malick is an LA-based yoga and Pilates instructor inspired by movement and the body. She was a competitive figure skater for 10 years and found a love for yoga as she transitioned out of the life of a competitive athlete. She has several certifications, including those from YogaWorks, Bossy Pilates, and Embodied Flow. She's also been trained in resistance, flexibility, strength training, and deep bodywork massage. We're going to have to talk about that at some point. I'm interested. Yes. I'm like, oh yeah, I need some of that. Through her yoga classes, she strives to create a safe and playful environment for students to explore their mind-body connection, as well as develop a keener sense of awareness both on and off the mat. And on a personal note here, as one of her frequent students, I have to say her classes are magical. Seriously.
Thank you, Connie.
You're welcome. You're like the get in the flow whisperer. I don't know. It just, there's some, and I know we're going to talk about communication and instructing later on, but you are just so first rate at it. It's so incredible. It's just how you can.
That means so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's always such a treat to have you in class.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Look at, can you feel the love, guys?
Oh.
No, but it's real. Oh my gosh. Yep. Well, today we'll be discussing whole body awareness, how that applies to a yoga practice and really any other movement. Oh, and also, did I mention Justine is the social media editor at Wanderlust Hollywood? Well, she is. So we'll also be talking about yoga in that realm. You know, how not to be that person with your yoga selfies. No, but really, we'll be exploring that whole realm as well. So without further ado, welcome, Justine. I am so psyched to have you here today. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your wisdom. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of Lady Balls, and I'm just stoked to be here with you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. So let's hear a little bit more about your story. You were a competitive figure skater. That's like, not that I was surprised when I found that out because you're just so incredibly graceful and I can totally see that, but like, that's exciting. So
I grew up in LA which is funny because Southern California, we don't get much snow or ice. Yeah. But when I was 6 years old, my mom and I went skating once, and then I ended up having my 7th birthday party at Isoplex, which was in Northridge. And it kind of grew from there. And I had my 8th birthday there, and I started taking lessons, and I started, I did my very first competition, and it turned into, wake up at 5 a.m., go before school, and really grew from there, this love of movement and being on the ice and jumping and spinning and all of the things. And so I was a figure skater for 10 years, and I ended up, there's different levels in the sport, and so I went all the way through. So there's 9 levels, and the name of the last level is senior. So there's a lot of jokes about being a senior lady. When you pass your test and you're like, go to Denny's before 7, get your early bird special because you're a senior.
Oh,
yeah. That's where my introduction to working with the body first, came into my life, and Pilates was a part of my training. So I started practicing Pilates, close to 12, 13 years ago. And so it was a very core focused, body-mind relationship that I hadn't really been cognitively aware of. Whereas as an athlete, it is a mind-body connection, and we maybe subconsciously know it, but this was a much more focused, practice in that way. And so it totally changed my understanding of being centered and what it means to move from a center and be grounded in that way. And to this day, if I'm feeling super out of my body, if I feel really stressed, or if I just feel like I've been running, like if I need to come back into myself, core work does the trick. I mean, it's pretty amazing when we talk about the parallels of being centered, as a metaphorical concept, but also like as a truly physical thing of being centered, and like, what does it mean to connect to center?
Right.
Whether that means just your abdominals or not, because core work is not just abdominals. So we can all look at all of these things with different perspectives, a different lens, and there's a lot of different layers. And so Pilates was the first thing that came into my life. And then I stopped skating because I wanted to go to college. I realized that at 18, I was old in the sport and I wasn't going to go to the Olympics as I had once dreamed. And so I decided to go to school, and I went to school in Santa Barbara. And that's when yoga entered my life. It was this huge transition. Skating had been my everything for a decade, and I was young, I was 18, and I just started going to class I went a couple times in LA. Like I went to Black Dog when I was in high school a couple times. And then there was this power yoga place on Tahunga, in the Valley that I was into, but never like truly like went that often, but I thought it was like, oh, kind of cool. What is this thing? And then when I went to school, I went to a studio in Santa Barbara, and something about the energy in the room was so powerful. I can't even really explain it. And I just was like, I have to go to this class. Like 2-3 times a week, I was at this one woman's class, and it was just, like 40 something people in this room, and it was packed, and we practiced in a circle, kind of Mysore style. Everyone's walls, not a circle. It's more like a rectangle because of the shape of the room, but the short edge of the mat was all the way at the wall. And then there was like an inner circle if you were late, because you had to go on the inside, and no one wanted that spot, but the really strong people would always be there. And it was just really inspiring. And everyone was having these individually, focused experiences, but simultaneously there was this whole collective happening taking place. And so it was awesome. And I just, for a long time, I thought that was the only class that was good. I was like, oh my God, I got to go to this class, like only Deb Dobbins class. And then years later, I had a job that paid for yoga. It was a retail job, and I started going to other classes, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's other teachers that are really good.
Right.
There's not just only one. Like, I was like, wow, there's other styles of yoga. Like, there are different ways of doing this, and there's similar energy in a room of having this collective group coming together and moving together, breathing together, meditating together, all of it. And it just kind of grew from there. And for a long time, I had thought that I would teach Pilates. I thought as a side job in college, like, it would be great. But I ended up falling in love with yoga to the point that I went through a yoga training first. And so I went through my yoga teacher training while I was still in college. And my last year, I started teaching a donation-based class at one of the co-ops in Santa Barbara. There's a pretty big hippie community in Santa Barbara, in Isla Vista. And that was where I first started teaching. And eventually I started subbing at a couple studios. And after I graduated, I went through my Pilates training. And for years, that's where I was. I was teaching in Santa Barbara, and I was loving it. I managed a yoga studio up there, and that was a very educational experience, about the different sides of the world of yoga. You have there's a lot of teachers that show up to their classes and they teach and then they leave. Or maybe they're a part of the community a little bit more actively and they come to class as well. And, they, devote their time to the community, but there's a whole other element of being behind the scenes of, checking people into class, making sure all the classes that need subs have subs, that everyone's taken care of. And so there's so many moving parts. I think anyone who's been involved with the yoga studio will tell you it really does take a village to make these communities, thrive and to let them evolve and grow. But so often yoga studios struggle because we want them to be community centers and we want to open them to everyone, but it's also a business. And so finding this balance is really tricky. And so, that's why a lot of yoga studios struggle.
Right.
But that was a very eye-opening role for me, to be teaching and devoting time and being of service in that way, but then also, managing and making sure that everyone else was taken care of as well. And so it was I'm so grateful for that studio and that the people I worked with are my family is what it feels like. And so, but eventually I started feeling like Santa Barbara was just too small, at least for right now.
Yeah.
And so, I was teaching at the best yoga studio, best Pilates studio, in my opinion. I'm a little biased, but in Santa Barbara. And, I realized that I needed to move, and I ultimately decided I was going to move to LA, but and this is where I'm from and my family's here and stuff, but I decided to travel before and I moved to Melbourne. And I had a working holiday visa, and this exists in Australia. As long as you're under 30, you can go and work there legally. And I didn't know anyone, and I left. And I gave the yoga studio like 4 months notice.
Well, right. It was just like immediately like, hey, this sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Here I go.
And I told, Eddie, the owner, and he cried, and it was like this big thing. Yeah. And then I just had this calling. I don't know what it was about Melbourne, but I didn't know anything about it. And I was like, this is where I have to go. And I found work literally days upon landing. And I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. That was also a very eye-opening educational experience in that, what is it to build trust? No one knew me there, just like I didn't know anyone. So how do you step into a space, hold space for people who are like, who are you? And you have this American accent and,
right.
But it happened, and it took some time, and slowly it was like, oh, people are showing up. And I got to know students because I stayed for 7 months. It was originally supposed to be a month-long trip, and it turned into 7. And I really enjoyed that experience of what does it mean to build trust, and what does it mean to trust myself, that it's like, okay, I know who I am, at least to a certain extent as a teacher, I know what I'm doing to a certain extent. I'm still learning and all that, but like, I know how to teach a class and I can do this. And it was like, okay, well, let's go do it.
Right.
And it happened. And it was a very helpful experience in moving to LA because I think that's, when I look back on it, I think that's why I stayed for so long, is I don't think I was ready to move to LA just yet. This is probably the most competitive city to be teaching yoga in.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't think I was ready to make that jump from little tiny Santa Barbara, like nurturing, kind of coddles you, holds you so dearly, everyone loves you, and then it's like spits you out to the big city. I needed this like bridge. And ultimately, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And when I came back here, again, it was this starting over because, I've never lived here as an adult until now. And so there were some people that I knew from high school and my family's here, but that's not the same support system. It's not the people who have watched you work at the front desk at a yoga studio, on trade. That's what I did at Yoga Soup in Santa Barbara. I just was there once a week for 5 hours to like check people in. And that's how I got to take yoga. And so everyone knew me as that person. And then all of a sudden I was like subbing classes, and then I was, managing the studio. So there's this huge evolution of my role there, but also people knew me from the beginning. So there was like 6 years that I was there, and that trust was building the whole time. Whereas like coming back here again, it's like this rebuilding of trust of like, who is this person? And again, I started similarly, I worked at a front desk at Wanderlust, and that was just at first that was never my goal. I thought I would just jump right into teaching, but the opportunity to be a part of the Wanderlust team came literally 2 weeks upon landing back in the States. And so I just I went for it, and it ultimately turned into a really beautiful thing, and it's continuing to evolve. But again, I met people that way, being at the front desk and the smiley person.
Right.
And I love meeting people that way. And I think it's a really nice exchange of energy of like welcoming people. And, I understand the dynamics of a yoga studio because I've been a part of them before, and I really value each aspect. I think there's no role that is too small. I mean, the person who cleans the mats, the person that, clears the space with Palo Santo, like all of these things are important for creating this space that we choose to come and that we choose to spend time and choose to devote to. And, so it started similarly. And that was back in, March of 2016. And so it's been over a year now, and I'm teaching there. I started teaching back in October with my own classes. I think I started something in June, but, it's just kind of grown. And so that's kind of where we've got to today, where I'm no longer at the front desk. Obviously, I was asked to take over social media back in May. And so I'm again balancing these two worlds. Like previously at Yoga Soup, it was managing a studio and then teaching, whereas now it's the social media and holding this piece of the marketing component, this
right, all the layers. I mean,
that it is.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And then teaching. And so I teach yoga at Wanderlust. That's the only place I'm teaching yoga right now. And then I teach Pilates. I have some private clients, and it's starting to build that a bit. So it's just nice. I really appreciate this balance of like computer work essentially and phone in my cell phone, and then teaching. And so it, for now, is feeling really good and working itself out. I think schedules are alive and they're evolving, and I'm just watching mine continue to evolve and, stepping in and getting involved with that dynamic as needed.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because I definitely want to move on to our main topic too, but this is such an interesting thing, and something I know so many of both of our guests and listeners have like talked about is follow, you called it like I followed that calling to Melbourne. And then as you're telling your story, it was like you kept picking up the next breadcrumb and the next breadcrumb and the next breadcrumb, right? But so many of us, and I'm sure you probably felt it somewhat too, but went for it anyway, feel that like, well, this is crazy. Why am I going to Melbourne I don't know anybody? And like, what does this even mean? So can you just talk a little bit from your own personal experience of, like if somebody's feeling a pull to something, obviously for everybody, it's not going to necessarily to teach yoga in Melbourne, Australia.
Absolutely.
But, whatever it would be for them, like what let you just go, you know what I'm doing? I'm just going to listen to that inner voice, and I'm going to follow that calling, because it has created the life you have now, which is, I mean, knowing you is perfect for you, right?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I've thought about this a lot, because in the embodied flow training that I'm in, we talk about these kind of things a lot. And because these are not measurable things. You can't, say like, am I feeling paranoid, or am I feeling, is that my intuition? What is this balance? And that's what really I think it is what is intuition? Where is it in us? Where do we feel it physically? When you're like, this is what I need to do. It's like, where is that? That's somewhere in your body. And so I think the more of these practices that we start integrating of inquiry, it really is inquiry, inquiring what's happening on the inside, whether that's emotionally, whether that's physically, whether that's spiritually, analytically, all of these things, it's like they're going through us. And so, and this really, ties into the idea of flow. And like in a yoga practice, we are as a teacher, I'm facilitating this movement practice with the idea that people can drop into a flow state to a certain extent. I mean, we're not, it's like, I think some of these workshops where we give, when people have like 2, 3, 4 hours, right, to spend with people and kind of discuss and, get into the nitty gritty, like you could really go somewhere in that state. Whereas in a public asana class, we have 75 minutes. And so there's an understanding that of that there's only so much we can do in that time. But I think movement can really facilitate this kind of dropping in. And so, in the training that I'm in Embodied Flow, we talk a lot about flow states and about how there's an effortlessness to them, but they are focused. It's not a passive thing. It's not I'm just sitting by and everything's just falling into place. It's like I am actively present in my own life. I am, consciously aware of the decisions I'm making, but there's also this like allowance of things happening, so there's this balance, if that makes sense. I mean, so for me personally, as I was researching Australia, because I heard about this visa and I was like, oh my God, I can go work there, like legally, I can work there. And it's just, what? Okay, let's do this, and like that was such a cool concept. And so I really remember clearly this conversation I had with my best friend, Katie. We're sitting at the French Press in Santa Barbara. They have multiple ones, but we were at the old one. And we're sitting there on State Street, and I'm telling her about my trip, and she's traveled a bunch and she surfs. And so she's been to Australia before. And I was saying how, I'm going to go to Sydney, and then I'm going to go to Byron Bay, and then I'm going to probably come home, and she was like, okay, that's cool. Like those are, like the two known places. Like Byron Bay is like the trendiest little surf beach town with lots of hippies. And it's a lot like Santa Barbara, and Katie and I have this mutual friend, Hayden, and her friends live on the Surf Coast, which is below Melbourne. And as I'm talking to Katie, she was like, well, why are you going on this trip? Like, what is the point here? And it's like, you want to get out of Santa Barbara. You want to do something new. You want to push yourself to grow and expand. And we have this mutual friend who had friends down there, and she was like, why don't you go visit them? Like you have this opportunity, like forget about Byron Bay. Cause it's cool, but it's like Santa Barbara is even better. So why go, and I was like hearing her speak, and I was like, yeah, she's right. Like I want to meet people, and that was so interesting to me. And so that conversation turned into me looking up, how do I get to Torquay, which is this little place on the Surf Coast where these friends are that I've, never met. And, as I'm looking up how to get there, I realized I have to fly to Melbourne, from Sydney to Melbourne. And I was like, what is Melbourne? Like, what is happening here? And so I started researching it, and I ended up not going to the Surf Coast until like way later. But like I ended up going from Sydney, was there for a week, saw like the big opera house, and then flew to Melbourne and just didn't leave.
Right.
And so there was, through that process of like researching the trip and figuring out, what is it that I'm looking for? What do I want to do? It became really clear to me. It was like it was not this, let me rephrase this. So as I was researching the trip, it was a very strong sense of home. I was like, this is home.
Right.
And I remember telling someone else that before I left. I feel like I'm going home, which is bizarre because LA's been home forever. Santa Barbara is home, and no one I know is there. But it was like something was telling me that's where home was, right, at least for now. And so, and when I got there, I did a lot of writing, like journaling while I was there, and that was one of the things that kept coming up. A theme for me, it was like, what is home? Like what is it? And so, we get to choose, I think, to a certain extent, but home can be anywhere. We can make a lot of places a home. And one of the girls who actually did this visa before me, it was a yoga teacher, and she made a comment that yoga teachers are nomadic in nature, or by nature. They're nomadic beings. And this happens all the time at yoga studios where someone picks up and leaves. And they're like, I'm going to go to India. I'm going to go to Bali. I'm going to go to Texas because I need to go live in Austin. And it's like, okay, cool. And like people were constantly teaching that we like follow these different paths that we can potentially take. And plenty of people are doing it. Or it's like someone's having a kid, so they're going to stop teaching, or someone is getting married and they're moving. And so there's constantly this evolution happening at yoga studios all the time. It's like a teacher you love, all of a sudden they're not there anymore because something happened and they're leaving, and it might have nothing to do with the studio. It has something to do with their own life.
Right.
And so, so when my friend was telling me that like teachers are nomadic, and I was like, oh, you're right. I get that. But also, like, for me personally, I like to feel at home. So I like to know that I have like a place to come home to. So even though I moved around a bit in Melbourne, I chose to be there pretty much the whole 7 months. I mean, I traveled a little bit. Like, I did go see Byron Bay, and I did actually go to Bali and like this kind of stuff. But Melbourne was my place. You know, I taught there, I worked there, I really like got to know people. So for me, that's important. I like to have this home base to come home to, and that's community for me too. It's like to get to know people that way. But I guess like circling back to intuition, I think learning how to listen to that is something that we're always going to be practicing, you know, and
Right.
My hope is that through these practices, whether it's Pilates or whether it's yoga or whether it's running or whatever it is, that we are asking ourselves, who are we, you know, and we are inquiring within of like, what's happening in there? What am I feeling right now? What does that mean? And it's a deeper sense of listening, and it's getting attuned to the subtleties. It's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So, you know, we know when sometimes it takes like knowing what we don't like. Like, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Nope. If I try going this way, it's like, nope, I can't do that. Okay, cool. Which way do you want to go? Don't know. You know? Okay. And it's like this like trial and error thing of like, sometimes you have to do that, like choose like 7 different routes before you're like, this is for me. And then other times it'll become clearer sooner, you know?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Okay.
It does make sense. I mean, what I'm hearing you say, well, partially like to maybe get out of our head and get into our body
Yeah.
to feel like what like you said, that's what you said. What does this feel like moving towards this, or
Yeah.
planning it, or thinking about what is it, how does it make me feel? You know, as if it like major apprehension and panic, well then probably is not right. But I
Right.
think a little bit of like excitement, or a lot of bit of excitement,
Yeah.
is good. So I hear that, and I hear you also bringing back in the thing you talked about earlier about trust and how important that
Totally.
is. I mean, you were talking about trust in terms of your yoga students, but also yourself, right?
Totally
To
with myself.
trust
I mean,
ourselves, like, and it might
it's a
not be
huge thing.
perfect, right? We have to be open to. That's why I love how you had you were like, I'm gonna go to the surf coast.
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
know.
do that.
And
And then it's like,
I
no,
never
I'm
made
not. I'm willing to
it.
change course because that's like what
Yeah.
your inner GPS was like
Yeah.
giving you at the time. So no, that totally makes sense. I think it's hard sometimes. This is something I've been working on, and yoga has
Yeah.
helped so much, is because I think a lot of times what we say we want as intuition is really like a clear-cut answer and like a guarantee,
Yeah.
which
Which that's not what it is
that's
at all,
not,
right?
that's not going to
So,
happen. That's
yeah,
not
that's
life.
not going to happen. And expecting that to come from a deeper sense of knowing is also just setting ourselves up for disappointment. Like, clarity is a relative thing,
Right.
I think. And that's a big thing. I think this also speaks to the idea that everything is relationship,
Yes.
right? So we have our relationship to ourselves, we have our relationship to other people, and then we have our relationship with the whole world around us, everyone, you know? So all of these different things, it's like we are never going to have 100% clarity on like, well, what's he thinking about this?
Right.
And like, even with ourselves, it's never going to be a black and white thing. And so there is a level of, you know, risk taking or jumping into the unknown that we have to, maybe we're comfortable with and maybe we're not. And so that to me was a big thing of being like, I don't know what this is that's telling me that I need to go here, but I'm doing it.
And you're trusting it. Yeah.
And I'm trusting it, and I'm just going to, you know, and I remember having this conversation with my parents, and they were, you know, they totally supported me, you know, let me say that. But there was this conversation about finding work, and they were like, well, are you going to be okay if you don't find work right away? And I was like, yes, I am. Like, I have money saved and that kind of thing. but that's not going to be an issue. And, you know, I said it with such confidence, like I don't even know where it came from.
Yeah.
And so my mom just was like, Justine, you know, sometimes it's not that easy, you know? And I totally heard her. I agreed with her, and I was like, I know. I was like, but this is not going to be like that. And so when the day that I was leaving Sydney, I was there for a week, and I was leaving there on a Wednesday, and I went to a Pilates class because my flight was at 2 p.m. that day, and I went in the morning to this Pilates class, and the teacher was not that great. She was picking on me a ton, which is fine, for being hypermobile and for being super flexible. And I was like, I know, I hear you. I'm sorry that my ribs are flaring or whatever, or I'm back bending too much. I'm just super bendy. And so I'm trying to tell her, you know, but like not trying to be distracting for the rest of the class. And then there was this other guy that she just loved. And she's like telling him how great his form is and all this stuff. And we finished the class, and she's talking to this guy and telling him how great he is. And he says, well, I'm actually a Pilates instructor, and I teach in Melbourne, and I have a studio. And he says the name of the studio, Happy Melon. And I had made a list. I didn't reach out to any studios, but I made a list of studios that I was potentially going to reach out to. And I was going to, you know, meet the people before asking to teach, you know, like join their schedule. And I overhear, I'm like such a bad eavesdropper for my whole life. I've always had this habit of listening in on conversations. And so I hear him say Happy Melon. And after they finish talking, after she finishes like gushing with compliments, I say, hey, did you just say Happy Melon? He was like, yeah, I did, which the studio at that time was 4 months old. And he was like, excuse me, can I ask you, like, how do you even know what Happy Melon is? And I was like, well, I did some research and because he heard my accent, he knew I was obviously not from there. And the Happy Melon's on my list. I'd like to check it out. I'm like interested in potentially teaching there. And he was like, this is crazy. Like, if you reach out, like, you're going to talk to me. Like, I'm the head of Pilates and one of the founders of the whole studio. And I was like, what? And so that was a Wednesday. We both flew back. I flew back Wednesday. I flew there. It was my first time there, not back. I was flying to Melbourne Wednesday, and he flew back on Thursday. I had an interview on Friday, and I was hired. And so that happened. And it was like this crazy, like, what are the chances that this guy is in this class and that I went to this class?
Right.
Right. And like, he doesn't even live in Melbourne. And so his whole like 2 years prior had been devoted to opening this new studio, which is actually partly a mindfulness center. And they have yoga and fitness, and they have Pilates and meditation, and they want to bring in mindfulness to all of it. And they run like MBSR programs and stuff. And it's this awesome place. But I don't know what the chances are that he was in Sydney at that time, because it was his first time taking 4 days off in like 2 years.
Right.
And it was like this crazy thing. And so I remember calling home and just being like, you won't believe what happened. And so it was like this crazy, there was a lot of moments like that where it was just like,
serendipity.
What? Yeah. Serendipity was a word that came up so many times. I mean, so I get to Melbourne, and the studio that was a 5-minute walk from the Airbnb that I randomly chose, you know, it was like a house filled with like 10 millennials. And I walk into this studio, and I was like, I like had chills. I was like hinching myself. It was so beautiful. It's like this old studio that's been there since the 1990s. And it was named Gertrude Street Yoga. And that ended up being my true home in terms of yoga in Melbourne. And I'm really close with the owners now. Hannah was just here last week for a workshop at Wanderlust and stayed with me here. But that's where I ended up teaching. And it was like, what are the chances that I chose this Airbnb? And it was 5 minutes walk. And that's all of these things. There's a lot of moments like that. And so I find that when we set ourselves up, like going back to this idea of intuition and flow, and how do we like facilitate the environment for us to slip into flow states. And I think there's a lot of work that goes into it, to setting ourselves up for that to happen. And it could be like, for myself, it was like going through all the trainings I went to, going through the experience of managing a studio, and like whatever. You can list a ton of things of my life experience at that point, but all of it was setting myself up that I felt comfortable to walk into some foreign country and be like, hey, can I teach here? and to have full confidence and be like, hey, I can do this, so that, I don't know, that's where it comes from, I think, for me, like, is to give yourself the building blocks so that you can put something together.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, in a whole nother level, like, it comes from trust. Like, I feel safe. If I feel safe, I feel comfortable to jump. So why do I feel safe? It's like, well, I have a support system. I have people I can turn to if I don't feel comfortable, right? So I know that no matter what, wherever I am, I can call someone and be like, I'm struggling, and have someone to talk to, whether that's my parents, whether that's my best friends, or all of these things are super important, so that we feel, if we are taking a big risk, that we can't feel that we're taking it in all aspects of our life all at once.
Right.
So there has to be some places of our life that feel really comfortable and safe, so that in another aspect, on the whole, in a different place, that you're able to take a big risk. So maybe that speaks to intuition as well.
So true. So true. And the other, what you were saying too about serendipity.
Yeah.
Which sometimes, is it serendipity, or which I guess technically it is. It's once again not quantifiable. We're not going to like, oh, let me hook up the serendipity meter on this, and we're getting a 7.9. But like we tend to get what we expect. Like, you were using the example of like, well, Mom, that's not going to be an issue because I'm going to get a job right out of the gate.
Right.
And instead of going, oh, I'm never going to get a job, I am so not going to get a job, I'm going to be like dwindling down these savings. Because like, if you would have had that mindset, I think that that scenario could have played out just as easily.
Yeah. And it's like a chicken or an egg thing. Is it like, did I get a job because I was that confident, or like, was it the opposite, And I think I don't know where that trust was coming from, but I was so sure.
From you. Yeah.
And so, and I don't know, and this is the thing of like, when we're in the places of the reverse, where we're stuck in that place of, I'm never going to get out of this, or like, I'm broke and I don't have a job and I'm going to figure this out. How do we fix the mindset? How do we get into the other place of like, I can do this? And so for me, a lot of what a yoga practice is, it's like, what is a reset? What is, when you're not in flow, when everything feels off, when everything is not serendipitous and everything is, sluggish and stagnant, like Ayurvedically speaking, right? Stagnation is the breeding ground for disease, or you can think of it as dis-ease. And so how do we bring back the ease? How do we bring that fluidity? And so for me, asana is one of the practices that helps me reset. It helps me get back into self. It helps me get back into my own breath and my own body, which is such a like more easeful, joyful place to be. But yoga and asana is not for everyone. Sometimes the reset might be running. Sometimes it could be anything, as long as you have something. We just need these practices, because that's what they are. They're practices.
Right. To get you back in touch, with yourself. So, oh my gosh, I could talk about intuition all day long.
Oh my God. I love that we got on this tangent.
I know. I'm like, maybe this is its own episode, and then we will make the other stuff. This will be like a twofer.
You can do a twofer.
Yeah, no, because I think it's something that's so hard to clearly, paint a picture of, but I think it's something that so many people struggle with, and it's something that we all strive for so much, to be in that flow state. And you are the expert. I mean, really, even if, like, just, guys, seriously, if you are in the area, take one of Justine's classes, because that's what I was saying when I introduced you, is you are the get in the flow whisperer. I don't know.
I love that.
I don't know exactly. Like, I can't say, oh, well, you have this exact phrase, or you have this this signature, adjustment, or you have this like specific sequence that is just killer. I mean, all of those things, to be sure, but it's just it's the whole package. So I think because you are in that place for yourself, it's so much easier for you to communicate that to your students, whether that's verbally, through touch, through, the
Right.
instruction, the little nuances that go with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just a long way of saying, well, thank you, and I'm glad we got on this tangent.
I'm so glad too. Yeah.
Because I just think sometimes people need that reminder, and that it's okay to switch course, if
Yeah,
that's what's
totally.
happening
And
too.
also, just because we get there, like, I mean, coming back to LA was a whole different experience. It didn't feel that way. Like, Melbourne was so easeful, and there was so many serendipitous moments right off the bat, whereas LA didn't feel like that. And so there was a moment, before I started working at Wanderlust, and I was like, why am I here? How did I get here? This doesn't feel good. Am I supposed to be in LA? And that was a moment too of like, okay, if this isn't right, maybe there's somewhere else that I should go. And like, what does that look like? But then I walked into Wanderlust and was like, oh, wow. I like it here.
Yeah.
And there was another feeling of like home. And I've been there ever since. And so, but it's just interesting to like, once we learn or once we experience this like feeling of flow, I think it helps us when we try to recreate it or recreate the environment for us to get back there.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. No, that is such a good point too, to just appreciate it at the time. So let's like recap quick. So for
Okay.
people,
Yeah.
I didn't write all this down in order, so
Okay.
I'm going to just follow my intuition. No,
Okay, I love it.
no, but we're saying, be prepared, right? Like put yourself in positions where you can experience the things that you want to experience. Trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's a huge one. Yeah.
Trust yourself. Listen sometimes, or sometimes, I would say most of the time, listen with your body, with your feelings, with your emotions and reactions, instead of just like trying to think things through all the time, right? Like I know we've all been there making that list, like, okay, well, on the pro side, on the con side, and then you somehow try to quantify all that, and it just doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, and those like gut instincts, right? Like we talk about.
Yeah.
Right? And so.
And gut instincts are real, by the way. I don't mean to get
they
off on another
real. No,
tangent, but that's like the
real.
second brain, right? Like in our gut.
Yeah, well, there's
literally.
actually 3. There's like the movement center, which is like lower, like would be between, like if you put your hand between your belly button and your pubic bone, there's a movement center there. And then there's the heart center, which we know. And then, like the movement center is the gut, right? And then we have our heart center. And then we have like the head, right? Which is the perceiver receiver. And I don't like to just say brain, but like, because it's more than just our brain, right? Mind is more than just our brain. It's not just that organ. And so memory, like where is our memory? Like sometimes you are in pigeon pose and you're in this deep hip opener and all of a sudden you have this rush of emotion and you have this trigger of memories. And it's like, well, that's not your brain. That was somewhere in your physical body, right? Other than just so all these things. But those are the first 3 places to develop in our bodies, like in embryo, which I think is fascinating. That those 3 places have such an impact on how we engage and interact with our own lives.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess intuition really is. So literally there's a reason to be in tune with our bodies instead of just the brain. So that makes so much sense. That's like a whole nother, like, I think,
God. All of these things you could like go on.
We need to start a whole new, Justine and I will be co-hosting a new series. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's so true. So, okay. So listen to your body, trust, be willing to shift course, and have figure out what your reset button is because all of us are going to get off course, right? I don't care how evolved or in tune. There's always could be something that triggers us, or just we get off distracted for whatever reason, and we all need to hit that reset button. And like you said, that could be different. But would you say that it's almost always movement?
No, I don't think so. I think for me, like that is a huge part of it.
Right.
But these are things that are not always like this is like quite small if we think of like day to day. But like, what about if we zoom out a little bit and you look back and you're like, that year, 2012, was an awesome year. You know, like I felt really good about that. I felt like things were falling into place. And then it's like, oh, but like 2013, I felt really stuck. And so we can think of it as like day to day, which I think is super important of like, oh, I'm super stressed out. Like I couldn't get the parking spot at the market and like everything's going, like I feel crazy. And it's like, okay, cool. So I'm going to sit down and meditate, right? Meditation could be the thing. Or like, I'm going to go jump around, you know, like jump outside and like go for a run. I actually don't run, so I don't know why I keep giving that as an example.
But I'm saying
I think
maybe
some
a
people
marathon is in the future. Like you don't even know it yet, but you do seem to be coming back to running and off the line.
Yeah. I think because a lot of my students that have come in, like, are runners. I don't know. So I equate it with like being this meditative like thing, but
it's not for everyone. Trust me. I've done 2 marathons, and I'm like, never again, never. The concept of runner's high is like, I don't believe it. I don't see how this works for people.
So maybe this is something I created in my mind because I think of it as in this way, but I have no personal experience. But so, I mean, that's also, I guess, a physical experience. But what about drawing? What about painting? What about
cooking?
Cooking. Yeah, all of these things, like gardening. All of these things can be the reset if that's what speaks to you. So it's really about exploring. And this is where that trial and error thing, you got to try different things. You got to meet different people to find the person who's your person, you know? And who are your friends? Like all of these things like take time and like meeting a lot of people. And so doing a lot of things. And the reset can be a lot of different things. And it can be, you know, if you feel like, okay, I'm ready to leave my job that I've had for 15 years, like that's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And that takes a lot of, you know, guts. It takes a lot of trust within self that like, okay, this might not be the best thing for me financially right now. And it's like, well, that's terrifying. Right. Right. And so acknowledging that, and like, that's where, like you said, that pro con list could be super helpful of like, well, am I fully living right now? It's like, no, I feel like I'm suffocating. It's like, okay, time to change. And it, like, whether it's uncomfortable for a bit and then you find your place or your path or whatever, I think we all need these little mini resets and then major ones too, of like coming back into self, coming home to yourself. And that's another thing, just going back to this idea of home, I'm jumping back for a second. No, like that's what I realized is like I am home within me. So wherever I can be home.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's huge.
And like this, I mean, like I'm even feeling something physically of like now, of being like, okay, it's like a different kind of breath. And it's like, I'm home, you know, and it's like this reassurance of I am where I am supposed to be.
Yeah. And I love like you're taking home with you. It's internal. It's not because of all these external circumstances.
Right. Like it doesn't have to be Melbourne or it doesn't have to be, you know, Santa Barbara or whatever. It's, I'm in it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So our bodies are these, you know, this container, you know, so a yoga practice is a container to meet ourselves. It's like our mat is our container.
Yes. I love that. Oh,
mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm thinking we take a quick break and, we're either going to be back right away or we're going to split this into 2 episodes, but I'm going to risk a cliffhanger, you guys. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to be coming right back or if you're going to be listening to another show in a couple days. You don't know. Okay. But either way, we're going to take a quick break and we will be back when you'll have to see and find out. Okay.
To be seen. Yeah.
Okay. Badass Girls Unite. Want to be part of our inner circle? Head on over to ladyballsradio.com where you can join our VIP mailing list, check out the show notes for each episode, and access free bonus content. You can also head on over to our Facebook page, Lady Balls Radio, to join in the discussion, get updates on your favorite guests, and hear who's going to be on the show next. Okie dokie, we are heading back to the show. what's the verdict? There's going to be a part 2. Yay! We are wrapping it up for today. Big love to Justine Malick for sharing all those incredible gems on intuition, how we can get into a flow state. Oh my gosh, she seriously, get in the flow whisperer. I know that's kind of long and clunky, but that is her. So thank you so much, Justine, for sharing that. Guys, if you want to stay in touch with her or keep up to date with her in the meantime, before we get into the next show, JustineMalick.com or at Justine Malick on Instagram. So thank you all for being here. I promise on part 2, we will be discussing whole body awareness, meridians, how it applies to a yoga practice and any other movement really, and also some really juicy stuff on social media and yoga, right? There's a lot of discussion around that. So she's going to bring her expertise to that as well. See you on the next show. And until then, stay in touch with your intuition, guys. Okay, bye. I love you.